Saturday morning at 7 on AM 560, The Answer.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and I know talking dollars and cents in these times is unseemly in some quarters, but we're going to come out of this, if everybody believes that, and they should, and we're going to have to deal with the decisions that were made during it, and also the decisions that were limited because of decisions we had made previously about how we manage our states and how the federal government manages itself. Right? The limitations for states in particular that don't have the ability to print money because of what we have chosen to do in terms of fiscal policy. And for the federal government, which does have the ability to print money, what the implications of a $6 trillion disaster relief package may be, particularly on the monetary side with inflation. And that may just be the opener, as Trump just threw another $250 billion into the kitty yesterday for the payroll protection program. For more on this at the federal level, we're pleased to be joined again by Sheila Weinberg. She's the founder and CEO of Truth in Accounting, truthinaccounting.org, and they're out with a new report. We always like to check in with them for their reports on things federal, state, and local. This is federal. Sheila, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dan. You know, we released the Financial State of the Union. Unfortunately, this is the numbers before all of this crisis happened, and we were deeply in debt then. And we just, as you say, the printing presses are going, and the issuing of bonds are just, out of control.
Well, give us a picture of what America looked like at the end of 2019 before the pandemic.
Well, we were $113 trillion with a T in debt. That works out to be $737,000 per taxpayer. You know, and it comes down to an individual level of, you know, they have promised $53 trillion of Medicare benefits, $38 trillion of Social Security benefits that they haven't funded. And what that means is they have no idea where they're going to get the money to pay those. And we have no idea where we're going to get the money to pay, you know, all this debt that we're accumulating now.
Right, and so again, the important point that you're raising here is not just looking at the annual budget deficit, $1 trillion budget deficits, and that did get some ink at the end of last year. That's a pittance compared to the unfunded liabilities, which we've become familiar with that terminology in Illinois because of unfunded pension and healthcare liabilities at the state level. Right. But unfunded liabilities with respect to those promises that are being made and people that are receiving those entitlement benefits, but at what cost, and what's the trajectory of the existence of those programs?
Yeah, with the current crisis, you have to look at what the federal government, people are now expecting them to be, is what I call USA insurance. No matter what happens, the federal government must cover for these crises. But if you're an insurance company that offers business protection insurance, health insurance, car insurance, you're required to have reserves in order to pay the benefits. Well, the federal government, now USA Insurance, has no reserves, and in fact, they're $113 trillion in the hole.
What about with all these loans that we're handing out? I mean, is there any way to make sure that the money goes to businesses that are shut down, and not only, because I feel like they're going to thriving businesses as well? Because it's kind of a money grab.
As far as I understand the criteria for these loans, they're really not looking at, you know, whether you you actually need the money right now. They're just looking at, okay, do you have payroll? Are you going to have to lay off people? Or you might think you might have to lay off people. There's not a lot of criteria, that have been set on these loans. And, you know, people have sort of talked about, well, you're kind of Chicken Little, or why should we care about, Illinois' situation, Chicago's situation for years. Well, this is why you should care, because the city and the state are not in a position to even help its citizens because they also are hugely in debt, and as Dan mentioned, they can't print money, so now they have to go to the federal government and ask for money. Well, wouldn't it be a better situation where we had a true rainy day fund, that now that we have a horrible, flood, we could at least have some money set aside to pay for these issues?
Well, wait a second. I heard from Lori Lightfoot just recently that Chicago's well situated to weather the financial storm. That's a quote.
Well, I don't understand that, because they had, their last financial statement showed that they were $34 billion in the hole. Again, per taxpayer, $37,000 per taxpayer. If you're in a financial hole, remember, again, all those, financial planners have 3 months of, income, put us 3 to 6 months of income set aside, to have for rainy days, for problems. Well, if you're $34 billion in debt, you don't have a rainy day fund set aside to pay for these problems.
And thinking about the next phase or phases, plural, depending on how long this goes on of federal action, there's much discussion, as I'm sure you're hearing about. Well, the states are going to go because the revenue shortfalls are massive at the state level too, as you would expect. States are going to go to the federal government, particularly states like Illinois, and try to get a bailout. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know how excited most of the 50 states will be to talk about bailing out Illinois' pension funds. But there's another matter, too, which is pointed up in your report on the federal government, which is the federal government owes $8.44 trillion in unfunded military and civilian retirement benefits. So you have got to make sure, you'll have a revolt on your hand among veterans and among federal employees if you're further jeopardizing their pensions to bail out the pensions at the state level in places like Illinois or Connecticut, who are circling the drain.
Yeah, and states like Illinois, that theoretically the governor balanced the budget, ran a surplus. California, had a $7 billion surplus. If that was the fact, then why are they going to the federal government for help? They should have enough money on their own. It is eventually going to become can you pay the veterans? Can you pay the civil employees? Can you pay, the federal government, for some reason, people now, unfortunately, in their mindset have that they have to cover everything if there's a crisis. And, why weren't people planning for themselves? Why wasn't the state planning for itself? Why wasn't the city planning for itself? Instead of we weren't even getting balanced budgets. They should have been running surpluses to set up these reserves, and they weren't doing it.
This is a fascinating story, just to try to make these numbers real and the opportunity costs real for people. This is a story from ProPublica about New York City. In July of '06, Mayor Bloomberg unveiled a sweeping pandemic preparedness plan. Using computer models to calculate how a virus could spread, they concluded they needed it to stockpile both masks and ventilators. If the city confronted a pandemic on the scale of the 1918 Spanish flu, the experts found it would face a projected shortfall between, round numbers, 2,000 and 9,000 ventilators. So they began to stockpile those resources. Bloomberg held a pandemic planning summit with top federal officials, including Dr. Tony Fauci. In the end, the alarming predictions failed to spur action. They acquired 500 ventilators in total, and then they couldn't acquire more because there were budget cuts, because they couldn't manage their finances, account for their unfunded liabilities. And we find out that some of these ventilators started to break down over time. They were auctioned off by the city at least 5 years ago because the agency couldn't afford to maintain them. Now, a decade later, you're hearing the hue and cry from Bill de Blasio and, to an extent, Andrew Cuomo about New York City's need for ventilators. It's just a real-world expression of what we're talking about. You can't stockpile resources when you don't have the money to stockpile them, and then you can't go out and get the resources, the infrastructure you need when you don't have the money to do it. And at some point, you can't just offload that onto the federal government. And New York City, well, not, at least not in perpetuity, and not every time. And this is where states that have been badly mismanaged, like Illinois and New York and Connecticut and California and New Jersey, find themselves.
Yeah, we did a financial state of New York City, and they had $186 billion in the hole. So again, they're not planning ahead. They're not following just basic financial planning. And I think that one thing that this crisis might cause is people to sort of go, well, maybe we can't count on our governments. Maybe we do need to start taking care of ourselves, and also demand that these governments, at least follow their balanced budget requirements. But maybe we should even set up systems where we should have true reserves.
She is Sheila Weinberg, founder and CEO of Truth in Accounting. Check out their Financial State of the Union report at truthinaccounting.org. Sheila, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Dan and Amy.
Thanks. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. $250 billion of more help for small businesses proposed. Keystone Pipeline construction begins and the help wanted sign is up for lobbyists. Those stories next.
The